They say you can't know a man until you've walked a mile in his shoes. I think you can't know a man until you've sanded down the hull of his 60-foot sailboat. In my case, that man was my father, and sanding down the hull of the Albatross revealed a truth that blew my entire world apart. It wasn't about revenge when I started this. It wasn't about the money, or the house, or the way my own brother looked at me like I was something he'd scraped off his shoe. At first, it was just about honoring a dead man's last wish. It wasn't about revenge, until it was. And when that moment came, it was colder, quieter, and more absolute than any storm the Albatross had ever weathered. Stick around, and I'll tell you how I went from being the forgotten son to the man who held my family's entire world in the palm of his hand, all because of a worthless piece of junk. My father, Thomas, was a man of few words and calloused hands. He smelled of sawdust, salt water, and turpentine. For 40 years, he ran a small, respected workshop on the coast, building and restoring wooden boats with the kind of artistry that was dying out. He wasn't a businessman, he was a craftsman. He built boats that were meant to last lifetimes, not to turn a quick profit. His pride and joy, the vessel that consumed every spare moment of his last decade, was the Albatross. She was a vintage ketch, a wreck he'd bought for a song, and he was slowly, painstakingly bringing her back to her former glory. To me, she was a beautiful skeletal promise, sitting in the dry dock. To my older brother, Kurt, she was a pile of rotting wood sucking up money that he felt belonged to him. When Dad passed, the division of his meager estate was as swift as it was brutal. The family lawyer, a man who had known us since we were kids, read the will with a practiced, somber tone. Kurt, the firstborn, the one who had gone to business school and always wore a suit that looked a little too tight, got the family home. A modest but comfortable house with a view of the bay and the entirety of Dad's savings. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to be a significant cushion. And me, Dean, the younger son, the one who had spent summers in the workshop learning from Dad, the one who knew the difference between a marlin spike and a fid. I inherited the workshop, its tools, and one final binding request. I was to complete the restoration of the Albatross. The lawyer's words hung in the air, thick and heavy. Thomas was very specific about this, Dean. The boat was everything to him. Kurt couldn't hide his smirk. He saw it as a perfect division. He got the assets. I got the liability. After the lawyer left, leaving the scent of expensive cologne and cheap sympathy behind, Kurt clapped me on the shoulder. It wasn't a gesture of comfort, it was a gesture of ownership. "Look, little brother," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "I know you're sentimental, but let's be realistic. That workshop is prime real estate. And that boat," he chuckled, a dry, grating sound, "it's a worthless piece of junk. A money pit. Dad wasted years on it." I felt a hot flare of anger in my chest, but I bit it back. I was still reeling from Dad's death, my grief a raw, open wound. I didn't have the strength for a fight. It was his dream, Kurt, I said. My voice quiet. "Dreams don't pay property taxes," he countered smoothly. "Here's the deal. I'll give you 50,000 for the workshop. Cash. You can walk away, get a fresh start somewhere. Forget about this albatross around your neck." He actually smiled at his own stupid pun. 50,000. For a workshop and its prime coastal land that was easily worth 10 times that. It wasn't an offer, it was an insult. It was his way of telling me my inheritance was a burden, and he was the generous big brother willing to take it off my hands for a pittance. "No," I said, the word tasting like iron. The will was clear. "I have to finish the boat." Kurt's face hardened. The mask of magnanimity fell away, revealing the cold, calculating man underneath. "Don't be an idiot, Dean. You can't afford it. You'll be bankrupt in a year. That boat will sink you. Just sell it to me. I'll tear down the shack and put up some condos. At least then Dad's legacy will actually be worth something." That was the line. At least then Dad's legacy will actually be worth something. The implication was clear. A life spent building things with your hands, creating beauty from wood and sailcloth, was worthless. Only condos and cash had value in Kurt's world. "Get out," I said, my voice low and shaking with a rage I hadn't felt in years. He looked genuinely surprised, then annoyed. "Fine. Be a fool. But when you come crawling to me in 6 months begging for a loan, the offer will be half that. If it's even on the table at all." He left, and the silence he left behind was deafening. I was alone. My father was gone. My brother saw me as an obstacle. All I had was a dusty workshop filled with the ghosts of my father's labor, and a half-finished boat that felt more like a tomb than a legacy. That night, I slept on a cot in the workshop office, the smell of sawdust a poor substitute for comfort. I was broke, grieving, and completely overwhelmed. But as I lay there, staring up at the massive curved ribs of the albatross silhouetted against the moonlight, a flicker of defiance sparked within me. I would finish this boat. If it was the last thing I did, I would prove my brother, and maybe even a part of myself, wrong. The next few weeks were a blur of hard labor and quiet desperation. I moved my few belongings into the small apartment above the workshop. I lived and breathed the albatross. Every morning I was up at dawn, my hands quickly becoming as calloused as my father's had been. I worked from his meticulous notes and blueprints, trying to channel his patience, his skill, but it was a struggle. The money from my own meager savings was draining away at an alarming rate. I was buying marine-grade plywood on credit, eating cheap canned soup for dinner, and ignoring the growing stack of bills on the desk. Kurt would drive by occasionally in his new luxury sedan, a car I knew Dad's savings had paid for. He'd slow down, look at the workshop with a smug expression, and then speed away. He was waiting for me to fail. The world had told me my inheritance was a joke, a burden, a piece of junk. It was during the third month, when my hope was at its lowest ebb, that everything changed. I was working on the hull, a tedious, back-breaking job of sanding away decades of old paint and varnish to get to the bare wood. My arms ached, my lungs were full of dust, and I was seriously considering calling Kurt and admitting defeat. I was sanding a section near the keel, a part of the boat that was thick and reinforced. My sander hummed, and I was lost in the monotonous rhythm of the work when I felt it. A slight vibration, a hollow sound that was different from the solid thud of the rest of the hull. I stopped, my heart suddenly beating a little faster. I knocked on the spot with my knuckles. Thud. Thump. There it was again. A distinct hollowness. My father was a master craftsman. He didn't do things by accident. There shouldn't be a hollow spot there. Curiosity piqued. I scraped away the layers of paint more carefully. Underneath, I found no seam, no joint. It was perfectly smooth. But the hollow sound persisted. It made no sense. I ran my hand over the area, again and again, feeling for any imperfection. My fingers brushed against something tiny, a minuscule nub of wood that was almost invisible. It looked like a flaw, a tiny knot in the grain. On a whim, I pushed it. I heard a soft click. My breath caught in my throat. I watched, mesmerized, as a section of the hull, about 2 feet square, detached from the rest of the boat with a quiet hiss of well-oiled hinges. It wasn't a patch, it was a door, so perfectly integrated into the curve of the hull that it was completely invisible. My hands were trembling as I pulled it open. Inside the dark cavity, wrapped in oilcloth and packed tightly, were dozens of small, heavy canvas bags. And something else. A thick, leather-bound logbook. I reached in and pulled out one of the bags. The string was tied tight. With fumbling fingers, I managed to undo the knot. I tipped the contents into my dusty palm. They weren't coins, they weren't jewels. They were rocks. Dull, greasy-looking, oddly shaped rocks of varying sizes. My first thought was that it was some kind of ballast, some weird quirk of my father's design. Disappointment washed over me. Of course, just more junk. Then one of the rocks caught the dim light from the workshop bulb, and a fire ignited within it. A flash of pure, brilliant, prismatic light that seemed to burn a hole in the dusty air. My stomach dropped. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone what I was looking at. These weren't rocks. They were uncut diamonds. Millions of dollars worth of them, sitting in the hull of a worthless piece of junk. My knees felt weak, and I had to sit down hard on the dusty floor of the dry dock. I was surrounded by a fortune that defied comprehension. This changed nothing. No, this changed everything. Shaking, I picked up the logbook. The leather was worn, the pages filled with my father's familiar, neat script. But the words weren't about planking, or rigging, or varnish. They were dates, locations, and codes. Amsterdam, Antwerp, Sierra Leone. Names I didn't recognize. Weights in carats. Payouts. My father, Thomas, the simple boat builder, had been living a secret life. He wasn't just a craftsman, he was a high-level courier, a smuggler. The albatross wasn't just his passion project, she was his workhorse, her hidden compartments, her secret strength. This boat hadn't been a money pit, it had been his bank vault. I flipped to the last page. The entry was dated just a week before he died. His handwriting was a little shakier than usual. It was a warning, the last run is done. The nest is full. It's enough now. Time to just be a boat builder. But the old life has long shadows. If something happens to me, the partners will get restless. They know about the albatross. They don't know where she is, but they'll start looking once they hear I'm gone. They'll want what's theirs. Or what they think is theirs. Be careful, son. The sea gives, but it also takes. A cold dread washed over me, colder than any winter wave. My father hadn't died of a simple heart attack. Or had he? The logbook didn't say. But it didn't matter. He had left me more than a boat. He had left me a treasure, a secret, and a target on my back. His old partners would be coming. And my brother, my arrogant, condescending brother, thought he had inherited everything of value. He had no idea. No one had any idea. I sat there in the dust, a fortune in my lap, and a death warrant in a logbook. And for the first time since my father died, I laughed. It was a hollow, terrified, and dangerously exhilarated sound. Kurt wanted the workshop for pennies. He called my inheritance junk. He had no idea what this junk was really worth. The shock of the discovery didn't wear off for days. It was a low humming current of adrenaline and fear that ran just beneath the surface of my skin. I hid the diamonds and the logbook in the most secure place I could think of, a heavy bolted-down safe in the back of the workshop office that my father had always used for his official paperwork. Every creak of the old building, every car that slowed down on the road outside, sent a jolt of paranoia through me. I was a man sitting on a dragon's hoard, terrified of who might come to claim it. I spent hours poring over the logbook, my father's secret life unfolding before me. The man I knew, the quiet, steady man who taught me how to tie a bowline and how to respect the grain of the wood, was only one half of the story. This other man, the one who wrote of covert meetings in foggy European ports and tense handoffs in dusty African towns, was a complete stranger. It was a disorienting, gut-wrenching experience. It felt like a betrayal, but also, strangely, like an explanation. It explained his long absences, which he'd always passed off as sourcing rare lumber. It explained the sudden infusions of cash that would appear just when the workshop was struggling. It explained the deep haunted look he sometimes had in his eyes, a look I had always mistaken for simple wariness. I started having flashbacks, but they were different now, recontextualized through this new dangerous lens. I remembered being a teenager, helping him install a new water tank in the albatross. He had been so specific, so demanding about the placement, insisting on a custom-built, double-walled design. At the time, I thought it was just his obsessive perfectionism. Now I realized I had been helping him build a secret compartment. I remembered a night he came home late, his face pale and his hand wrapped in a bandage. He'd told my mother and me he'd slipped with a chisel. Now looking at an entry in the logbook from that same week, Antwerp drop complicated. Persuasion required. Minor cost. I felt a sick certainty that it hadn't been a chisel. This new knowledge was a heavy weight. My father wasn't a saint. He was a criminal. A highly skilled, successful, and apparently very wealthy criminal. And my brother Kurt, who prided himself on his business acumen and his superior understanding of wealth, was completely oblivious. He was living in the house Dad's secret life had paid for, spending the money Dad's secret life had provided, all while sneering at the very source of it all. The irony was so thick I could choke on it. My grief for my father became a complicated, tangled mess. How do you mourn a man you never really knew? How do you honor the memory of a simple craftsman when you learn he was a master of deceit? I felt lost, adrift in a sea of my own confusion. I needed to talk to someone who wouldn't immediately call the police or try to steal the diamonds for themselves. I needed an anchor, and there was only one person I could think of, Sal Moretti. Sal was my father's best friend, a retired marine mechanic who ran the fuel dock at the marina. He was a leathery, sun-beaten man with a booming laugh and eyes that had seen everything the sea had to offer. He'd known my father for 50 years, since they were kids messing around in rowboats. If anyone knew the truth, or at least a part of it, it would be Sal. I found him where I always found him, sitting on an overturned bucket at the end of the pier, cleaning a fishing reel with methodical care. He looked up as I approached, his brow furrowed with concern. "Dean, you look like you've seen a ghost, kid," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble. "Worse," I replied, sitting down on a piling next to him. "I think I'm seeing my father for the first time." I didn't tell him everything. I couldn't. It was too dangerous. But I told him about the hidden compartment. I told him about the logbook. I didn't mention the diamonds. I just said I found things that suggested Dad wasn't who we thought he was. I watched his face carefully for any sign of shock or surprise. There was none. He just sighed, a long, weary sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. He put down his reel and looked out at the water. "Your old man was a complicated guy, Dean. He loved you and Kurt. He loved your mother. But he was restless. He grew up with nothing, and he always had a fear of it. A deep, real fear." "So you knew?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You knew he was doing something else?" Sal shrugged, not meeting my eye. "I knew he had ways of making ends meet when the boat business was slow. I knew he traveled more than he let on. I never asked for details, and he never offered them. It was an unspoken rule between us. Don't ask, don't tell. It was his business. But I always had a feeling it was a dangerous business." He finally turned to look at me, his eyes full of a sad wisdom. "He did it for you, you know. For the family. To make sure you all had the house, the security he never had. He left Kurt the house and the money," I said, the bitterness creeping into my voice. "He left me a boat full of secrets and trouble." "Did he?" Sal asked, a glint in his eye. "Or did he leave you the real legacy? Your father respected what Kurt did, but he didn't understand it. Suits, spreadsheets, hostile takeovers. That wasn't his language. But wood, steel, sailcloth, that he understood. He left you the thing he loved most. The thing he built with his own 2 hands, secrets and all. He trusted you with it, Dean. Not Kurt." His words hit me harder than Kurt's insults ever could. "He trusted you with it. My father, in his own strange, secretive way, had chosen me. He had burdened me. Yes, but he had also trusted me. He had left me the key to his entire hidden world. The boat wasn't a punishment, it was the ultimate test." I spent the next few days in a state of suspended animation, my mind racing. The initial fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach whenever I thought about the partners. But Sal's words had ignited something else in me: resolve. My father had left me a puzzle, and I was going to solve it. He had left me a mission, and I was going to complete it. I would finish the albatross, not just as a tribute but as a declaration, and I would use the tools he left me, all of them, to do it. This was the catalyst. My breakdown was over. The fog of grief and confusion began to lift, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. The world thought I was a broke, sentimental fool. My brother thought I was a failure in the making. Let them. They were playing checkers, while my father had left me a chessboard and a set of pieces they couldn't even see. The first step was to understand what I was dealing with. I couldn't just walk into a jewelry store with a bag of uncut diamonds. I needed an expert, someone discreet and trustworthy. This was where the modern world came to my rescue. I spent hours on encrypted browsers, diving into the murky world of gemology and the private diamond trade. I learned about the 4 C's: cut, color, clarity, and carat. I learned about the Kimberley process and the shadowy markets that bypassed it. My father's logbook was a masterclass in this world, and I was its sole student. I took one of the smallest stones, a rough, unimpressive-looking piece about the size of my thumbnail, and wrapped it carefully. Sal, after some prodding, had given me a name. Not a local, but a man in the city 2 hours away. "He's an old-school appraiser," Sal had said. "A guy who values privacy above all else. Name's Mikhail. Tell him Sal Moretti sent you. It won't get you a discount, but it might get you through the door." The trip to the city felt illicit, like something out of a spy movie. Mikhail's office was on the top floor of a nondescript building, with no sign on the door. I was buzzed in, and I found myself in a small, quiet room that smelled of old books and strong tea. Mikhail was a tiny bald man with eyes magnified by thick spectacles, making him look like a wise old owl. He looked me up and down, his gaze sharp and intelligent. "Sal Moretti," I said simply. He nodded, and gestured to a chair. "Let's see what you have." My hand was sweating as I unwrapped the diamond and placed it on the black velvet cloth on his desk. He didn't touch it at first. He just peered at it through his loupe, turning it over with a pair of tweezers. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. "It's a rough stone, obviously," he finally said. His voice a soft murmur. "From the alluvial deposits, I would guess. Maybe West Africa. The color is good. Maybe E. The clarity." He paused, focusing his loupe. "Internally flawless, very rare for a stone of this size." "And its size?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "As it is, maybe 10 carats. Once it's cut, you'd be looking at a brilliant cut of around 4, maybe 4.5 carats. Properly certified. A stone of that quality." He took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. "You could buy a very nice house with it." A house. For one of the smallest stones in the collection. I felt a wave of dizziness. The sheer scale of the fortune I was sitting on was almost too much to comprehend. "I have more," I said, the words sticking in my throat. Mikhail looked at me, and for the first time, a flicker of something other than professional curiosity crossed his face. It might have been pity. "Young man," he said, his voice gentle, "a collection like you are hinting at is not a treasure. It is a problem. A very large, very dangerous problem. It carries a history. People who deal in stones of this nature are not sentimental. You cannot simply sell them. The moment you try, you will attract the attention of people you do not want to meet, and agencies you cannot outrun." His words confirmed the warning in my father's logbook. I couldn't just cash out. I had to be smarter than that. "What if I don't want to sell them?" I asked. "What if I just want to use them?" He raised a skeptical eyebrow. "What does that mean? Can they be used as collateral? Can they be leveraged?" Mikhail leaned back in his chair, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Now we are having a more interesting conversation. Yes. To the right people, in the right private banks in certain flexible jurisdictions, a collection like that is not just wealth. It is power. It is silent, untraceable leverage." That was it. That was the word I was looking for. Leverage. I left Mikhail's office with a new sense of purpose. He had given me the name of a private banker in Switzerland, and a lawyer in the city, who specialized in discreet asset management. My plan began to form, not as a single grand act of revenge, but as a series of quiet, deliberate moves. First, I needed to fund the operation. With Mikhail's help, I sold that first small diamond through a private collector. The transaction was a labyrinth of shell corporations and encrypted transfers, but a week later, a significant sum of money, clean and untraceable, appeared in a new bank account I'd opened. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. The first thing I did was pay off the credit card debt I'd accumulated for the boat supplies. The feeling of relief was intoxicating. The second thing I did was hire a private investigator. Not for my father's partners, that was a battle I wasn't ready to fight yet, but for my brother. I wanted to know everything about Kurt's financial situation. I had a suspicion that his life wasn't as perfect as his smug expression suggested. The investigator's first report came back a week later, and it was better or worse depending on your perspective than I could have ever imagined. Kurt wasn't just living on Dad's savings, he was burning through them. He had taken out a massive second mortgage on the family home to invest in a speculative tech startup that was circling the drain. He had car payments he couldn't afford, and a lifestyle built on credit and arrogance. He was house rich and cash poor, a ticking financial time bomb, and the holder of that second mortgage. A small, aggressive out-of-state lender known for its ruthless collection practices. A cold, beautiful, and terrible idea began to bloom in my mind. It wasn't about destroying my brother. It was about balance. It was about karma. It was about showing him what a worthless piece of junk could really do. Using the lawyer Mikhail had recommended, I set up an anonymous LLC, a shell corporation with a bland, forgettable name. Then, through a series of complex financial maneuvers that my new lawyer handled with terrifying efficiency, my LLC approached the out-of-state lender and made them an offer. We would buy Kurt's mortgage debt from them in full for cash. Lenders like that are always happy to offload a potentially risky loan for a guaranteed payday. They agreed without a second thought. 2 weeks later, the paperwork was signed. Just like that, I, Dean, the broke boat builder, became my brother's creditor. I owned the debt on my own family home. Kurt had no idea. He would get a standard letter informing him that his loan had been sold to a new servicer, a common enough occurrence. He wouldn't even blink. He would just keep living his life, secure in his superiority, never knowing that the ground beneath his feet had just turned to quicksand. While this silent takeover was in motion, I poured my energy and a portion of my new funds back into the Albatross. I was no longer just restoring her. I was reforging her. I hired a small, skilled crew of retired shipwrights, old friends of my father's who were thrilled to work on such a classic vessel. We replaced every plank, every wire, every piece of rigging. The workshop, once quiet and lonely, was now filled with the sounds of methodical work, of saws and sanders, and the easy camaraderie of craftsmen. I was living two lives, just as my father had. By day I was Dean, the dedicated son, lovingly restoring his father's boat. I'd chat with people at the marina, share a coffee with Sal, and talk about the challenges of finding authentic brass fittings. But by night I was a different person. I was studying my father's logbook, learning the codes, memorizing the names. I was on encrypted calls with my lawyer in the city, managing my newfound invisible empire. I was tracking the slow, inevitable decline of my brother's finances. The logbook was my Bible and my shield. I realized it contained more than just a record of my father's dealings. It contained leverage against his partners. There were names, bank accounts, dates, enough information to cause a lot of powerful, dangerous people a world of trouble. My father had left me a weapon of mutually assured destruction. As long as I had the logbook, the partners couldn't make a move against me without risking their own exposure. The boat wasn't the prize they were after. The logbook was. And they had no idea I had it. Their first probe came about a month after I started the serious restoration work. It was subtle. A man appeared at the marina, a man who didn't belong. He was dressed in an expensive dark suit that was out of place among the fishermen and sailors. He was asking questions at the fuel dock, at the diner. Quiet questions about Thomas, the old boat builder. Had he mentioned any friends, any business partners? Did his son, the one working on the old boat, seem to have come into any money recently? Sal called me, the moment the man left. "Dean," he said, his voice tight. "A shark is circling the pier, dressed like a tacksman, but his eyes were all wrong. He was asking about your dad." My blood ran cold. It was starting. They knew Dad was gone, and they were sniffing around the edges of his life, looking for the loose thread that would lead them to their treasure. The man didn't approach me directly. That wasn't their style. This was a test, a way to see what would shake loose. I knew I had to do something, not to fight them, but to warn them. To show them that I was not my father's naive son, but the new keeper of his secrets. I went back to the logbook, to a specific entry about a man my father called Silas, a distributor based in London. The entry had a note next to it. Prefers the old ways. Believes in signs. I took another small flawed diamond, one not even worth cutting, and a copy of a single damning page from the logbook detailing a transaction Silas had handled. I put them in a small box and mailed it to a secure post office box in London that was listed in my father's notes. I included no message. I didn't need to. The diamond was the greeting. The page from the logbook was the warning. It said, "I know who you are. I have the rest of this. Stay away." It was a huge gamble. It could have backfired spectacularly. But I was betting that these men, who lived in a world of shadows and secrets, would understand the language of threats better than any other. For 2 weeks, I lived in a state of high alert, sleeping with a tire iron next to my cot. Every night, I expected a visit. But nothing happened. The man in the suit disappeared from the marina. The quiet questions stopped. My message had been received. They didn't know who I was, or what I was capable of, but they knew that the boat builder's son held the cards. For now at least, they would watch from a distance. With the immediate threat neutralized, my focus shifted back to my brother. The private investigators' reports kept coming in. Kurt's startup investment had officially gone belly up. He had lost a significant chunk of money. He was trying to hide it, putting on a brave face, but the numbers didn't lie. He was starting to miss payments on his credit cards. He was getting desperate, and that's when his phone calls started. At first, they were casual. "Hey, little brother. Just checking in. How's that old boat coming along? Still floating? The condescension was still there, but it was thinner now, laced with a new searching quality. I played dumb. It's coming along, Kurt. Slowly but surely. It's a lot of work. Yeah, well listen, he'd say, trying to sound offhand. I was thinking about Dad. And about you. It's a lot for one person to handle. That offer I made for the workshop, it's probably still on the table. Maybe we can even sweeten it a little. For family. I felt a cold smile touch my lips. For family. 2 words he only ever used when he wanted something. No thanks, Kurt. I'm good. I've got it under control. His calls became more frequent, more insistent. The panic was starting to show around the edges of his voice. One day he showed up at the workshop unannounced. He looked haggard, his expensive suit was wrinkled, and there were dark circles under his eyes. He walked around the hull of the Albatross, which was now gleaming with fresh coats of varnish, her brass fittings polished to a mirror shine. She no longer looked like a wreck. She looked like a masterpiece in the making. Wow, he said. And for the first time I think he was genuinely impressed. You've done a lot of work. This must be costing you a fortune. It's an investment, I said calmly, wiping my hands on a rag. He took a deep breath, the kind a man takes before he's about to ask for something he knows he doesn't deserve. Dean, I'm in a bit of a tight spot. I just looked at him, my expression blank. I didn't help him. I just waited. This investment I made, it didn't pan out. It's a temporary cash flow problem, that's all. I was wondering if you could, help me out. A short-term loan. I know you don't have much, but anything would help. For the family, this was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment the entire silent, intricate plan had been built for. This was my chance to be the magnanimous brother, to save him, to earn his gratitude, but I felt nothing. No pity, no desire to help. All I felt was the cold, hard memory of him calling my father's legacy a worthless piece of junk. I can't, Kurt, I said, and my voice was flat, devoid of emotion. All my money is tied up in the boat. The look on his face was a mixture of disbelief and fury. He, Kurt, the successful one, was asking me, the loser brother, for help, and I was turning him down. It was an affront to the natural order of his universe. Tied up in the boat, he sneered, his desperation turning to anger. You'd rather pour money into that pile of firewood than help your own brother, your own family. This pile of firewood was Dad's last wish, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. Something you never gave a damn about. You got the house. You got the savings. You made your choices, Kurt. Now I'm making mine. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a deck. He was seeing me for the first time, not as his pathetic little brother, but as someone who wouldn't bend to his will, and he didn't like it one bit. You'll regret this, Dean, he hissed, his face red with blotchy anger. When this whole stupid project goes under and you come crawling to me, don't expect any sympathy. He stormed out, his expensive shoes kicking up dust in the workshop. I watched him go, and I didn't feel a shred of regret. The first move had been silent and financial. The second had been a quiet declaration of independence. He didn't know it yet, but he had just lost the war. The panic was no longer just his, it was becoming the family's. He just had to go home and deliver the news that the family scapegoat had finally grown a spine. The fallout from my refusal was immediate and predictable. Kurt, unable to accept that he had been denied, went straight to the one weapon he had left in his arsenal. Our mother. Our mother, Helen, was not a bad person, but she was a weak one. She had spent her life orbiting 2 powerful sons, my father's quiet intensity and Kurt's loud ambition. She believed in keeping the peace at all costs, which in our family meant making sure Kurt was always happy. She saw him as the successful one, the one who reflected well on the family, while I was the quiet, reliable, and ultimately ignorable son. She loved me, I suppose, in her own way, but she valued him more. She arrived at the workshop the next day, her face a mask of worried disapproval. She brought a casserole, the classic Trojan horse of maternal manipulation. Dean, honey, she began, setting the dish down on a cluttered workbench. Kurt told me you had a little talk yesterday. We talked, I said, not stopping my work polishing a brass compass binnacle. He's just so worried about you, she continued, her voice taking on that familiar pleading tone. All this time and money you're spending on this boat, his father's house, His inheritance is at risk, and you're polishing metal." The framing of it was breathtaking. It was his house, his inheritance. The fact that the money he'd lost was also from Dad, and that the house had been paid for by a lifetime of my father's labor, both the legitimate and the illicit, was an inconvenient detail she chose to ignore. "Mom, Kurt made a bad investment. That has nothing to do with me or this boat. It has everything to do with family," she said, her voice rising. "He just needs a little help to get back on his feet." He said you refused to help him. How could you be so selfish? After everything he's done for this family. I finally stopped my work and turned to face her. "What? What has Kurt done for this family, Mom, besides take and spend and demand more?" She flinched as if I'd slapped her. "He's the successful one. He has a position to maintain. We can't have people thinking the family is struggling. What would people say?" It was never about what was right. It was always about appearances. The family couldn't look weak. Kurt couldn't look like a failure. And I was the designated resource to be tapped to prevent that from happening. "I'm sorry, Mom. I can't help him," I said, my voice firm. "My resources are committed to finishing the albatross, just like Dad asked." "Your father would be ashamed of you," she cried, tears welling in her eyes. It was the nuclear option, the guilt bomb she'd been holding in reserve. "He would want you to help your brother, not hide away in this filthy workshop with his old junk." A cold, hard anger solidified in my chest. His old junk. It was the same phrase Kurt had used, the same dismissive, contemptuous view of our father's life's work. They saw it as nothing more than a pile of scrap, while they lived in the house it built. "No, Mom," I said, and my voice was as cold as the steel in my hand. "I think Dad would be ashamed of a son who called his legacy junk while trying to sell it for scrap. I think he'd be ashamed of a family that only values things based on their price tag." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "You should go. I have work to do." She looked at me, truly looked at me, and I saw a flicker of fear in her eyes. The pliable, accommodating Dean she had known her whole life was gone, replaced by this cold, resolute stranger. She turned without another word, leaving the casserole on the bench, and fled. That was the family exodus. Not a physical departure, but a complete and total severance of the old dynamic. I was no longer the family's shock absorber. I was no longer the reliable fallback. I had been cast out, or perhaps I had cast myself out. The desperate counter-manipulation had failed, and in their eyes I had committed the ultimate sin. I had put myself and my father's legacy before Kurt's needs. The weeks that followed were quiet. The phone calls stopped. The unannounced visits ceased. It was a cold war, a silent, tense standoff. From Saul I heard whispers. Kurt was trying to secure a new loan, but with his recent losses and cratered credit, no one would touch him. He was becoming a pariah at the local yacht club, his bluster and confidence replaced by a twitchy, defensive anger. The facade was cracking. Meanwhile, the albatross was transforming. She was no longer a skeleton. Her hull was perfect. Her decks were sanded and sealed, and the new masts, carved from prime Sitka spruce, lay waiting to be stepped. She was beautiful, a testament to what my father had envisioned. I felt a sense of pride that was clean and pure, untouched by the drama with my family. This was real. This was tangible. The final piece of my plan was the most difficult. I had to decide what to do about the partners. I couldn't live my life looking over my shoulder. The logbook gave me power, but it was a dead man's switch. Using it would expose my father and potentially myself. I needed a more permanent solution. I needed to make the boat, the prize they thought they were hunting, worthless to them. I spent a week going through the boat with a fine-toothed comb, using the logbook's notes as a guide. I found them all. 3 more hidden compartments. 1 in the galley, behind a false wall. 1 in the main cabin, under a floorboard. And the cleverest one of all, a long, thin tube sealed inside the boom. All of them were empty. Of course. My father had consolidated everything into the one compartment I had found. My plan was simple, yet terrifying. I invited a certified marine surveyor to the workshop, a man with an impeccable public reputation for thoroughness. I told him I needed a full appraisal and inspection for insurance purposes before the boat's launch. I knew the partners would be watching, and a public, official survey would be noted. The surveyor spent 2 days crawling over every inch of the albatross, and I made sure he found the empty compartments. I'd accidentally leave a tool near a loose floorboard, or notice a panel that didn't look quite right. Each time he discovered one, he'd whistle. "Your old man was quite the character, wasn't he?" the surveyor said, peering into the hollow space inside the boom. "Built this thing like a smuggler's dream." "He was a craftsman," I said, my voice neutral, "and a bit of a paranoid, I guess." The surveyor's final report was a public document. It detailed the boat's impeccable restoration, its high value, most importantly, a section titled Anomalous Modifications. It listed, in painstaking detail, the discovery of 4 separate, empty and now fully exposed hidden compartments. The message to my father's partners was clear, and this time it was delivered not by a secret package, but by the public record. The treasure is gone. The vessel has been searched and scrubbed clean. There is nothing here for you. I had effectively defanged the albatross. She was no longer a target. She was just a boat again. A very beautiful, very valuable boat, but a boat nonetheless. I was finally free. I had the money, I had the boat, and I had neutralized the threats, both foreign and domestic. All that was left was the final inevitable confrontation. It came, as I knew it would, in the form of a certified letter. The notice from my shell corporation to my brother was a standard, legally required document. It was a notice of default and intent to foreclose. He had missed his 3rd mortgage payment. The grace period was over. The gears of the machine I had set in motion were beginning to grind. It was a gray, overcast afternoon when I saw Kurt's car screech to a halt in front of the workshop. He burst out of the driver's side, his face pale and contorted with a rage so pure it was almost sublime. He didn't even bother with the door to the office. He stormed right into the main workshop, the foreclosure notice crumpled in his fist. "You," he screamed, his voice cracking. "You did this." I was standing on the deck of the Albatross, making a final adjustment to the turnbuckles on the rigging. I looked down at him, my heart calm and steady. The moment I had been planning for, rehearsing in my mind for months, was finally here. I felt no fear, no anxiety. Just a profound, quiet sense of completion. "Did what, Kurt?" I asked, my voice carrying easily in the cavernous space. "Don't play dumb with me," he shrieked, waving the letter. "This company, this Maritime Holdings Group, they're foreclosing on my house. On Mom's house. I looked them up. They're a ghost. A shell company. It's you. It has to be you. How could you do this to your own family?" I slowly, deliberately, climbed down the ladder from the boat's deck and walked towards him until I was standing just a few feet away. He was breathing hard, his eyes wild. He looked like a cornered animal. "I didn't do this, Kurt," I said, my voice low and even. "You did. You did this when you took out a massive loan you couldn't afford. You did this when you gambled Dad's money away on a bad investment. You did this when you decided that your pride was more important than your responsibility. You set me up," he accused, jabbing a finger at my chest. "You had money all this time. You were fixing this boat. You could have helped me." "You're right," I said. "I could have. But why would I? You came to me, not for help, but for a handout. You insulted our father's memory, calling his life's work a piece of junk. You demanded I sell my inheritance, my legacy, so you could bulldoze it and put up condos. You and Mom came here and tried to guilt and manipulate me. You didn't want a brother. You wanted a bank. And the bank is closed." He was speechless, his rage momentarily short-circuited by the cold truth of my words. He had no defense, because everything I said was true. "How?" he finally whispered, the fight draining out of him. "How did you get the money? How did you buy my loan?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. I opened it and tipped the contents into my palm. It was one of the diamonds, one I had had Nikolai get professionally cut and polished. It was a perfect 4-carat brilliant, and it glittered under the workshop lights like a trapped star. Kurt's eyes went wide. He stared at the stone, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. "This," I said, "is a piece of the worthless junk. It turns out Dad's real savings weren't in the bank. They were in the hull of this boat. Millions of dollars worth, Kurt. The real family legacy. The one he trusted to me, not you." The blood drained from his face. The reality of his colossal miscalculation crashed down on him with the force of a physical blow. He had sneered at the treasure chest while fighting for the crumbs on the table. He stumbled back, his hand going to his mouth. So yes, I continued, my voice calm and merciless. Maritime Holdings Group is my company. I own your debt. I own the mortgage on our family home. The home my father's secret work paid for. The home you were so proud to inherit. I let the silence stretch, letting him absorb the full weight of his new reality. He had lost, completely and utterly. He had no power, no leverage, no moral high ground. He was at my mercy. What are you going to do? He stammered, his voice small. I'm not going to throw you and Mom out on the street. I said. I'm not a monster, Kurt. But things are going to change. You will no longer live in that house as its owner. You will live there as my tenant. You will pay me rent, a fair market rent, every single month. And if you are late, even by one day, I will begin eviction proceedings. You wanted Dad's legacy to be worth something. Congratulations. You're about to start paying for it. He just stared at me, his arrogance and pride stripped away, leaving behind a hollow, defeated man. He had built his entire identity on being the successful, superior brother, and in one afternoon, I had taken it all away from him, using the very thing he had despised. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about justice. It was about rebalancing the scales that had been tilted in his favor for our entire lives. The charade is over, Kurt, I said, turning my back on him and walking back towards the albatross. Welcome to the new reality. He didn't say another word, he just turned and stumbled out of the workshop, a broken man. I watched him go, and I didn't feel triumph or joy. I just felt quiet. The storm had passed. A week later, the albatross was ready. The new masts were stepped, the sails were bent on, and she sat in the water, bobbing gently at the marina dock. She was magnificent, more beautiful than I had ever imagined. Sal was there, along with the small crew of shipwrights who had helped me. They all looked on with a mixture of pride and reverence. My mother called me that morning. Her voice was small, tentative. She and Kurt had signed the rental agreement my lawyer sent over. They understood the terms. There was no more fight in her, just a weary resignation. I don't know if our relationship will ever be what it was, but perhaps that's for the best. What it wasn't real. As for my father's partners, I never heard from them again. The public survey and the quiet disappearance of the diamonds from the world market had sent a clear message. The trail had gone cold. My father's secret life was finally over, its final chapter written by his son. I took the albatross out that afternoon, just me and Sal. As we cleared the breakwater and the sails filled with wind, the boat leaned into the sea like she was born for it. The engine was off, and the only sounds were the creak of the rigging, the whisper of the water along the hull, and the cry of the gulls overhead. It was a peaceful sound. The sound of freedom. Sal stood at the helm, a wide grin on his face. Your old man would be proud, Dean, he shouted over the wind. Not just of the boat, of the man you've become. I looked out at the endless blue horizon, my hand on the smooth, varnished wood of the railing. My father had left me a complicated, dangerous and priceless inheritance. He had left me a puzzle that forced me to become a man I never thought I could be. He was a simple boat builder. And he was a master criminal. He was a stranger, and he was my father. I finally understood that I didn't have to choose. I could hold both truths at once. My brother Kurt learned a hard lesson. He learned that true value isn't always something you can count in a bank account. Sometimes it's hidden in plain sight, in the things we dismiss as worthless junk. He learned that respect is earned, not inherited. He and my mother still live in the family home. They pay their rent on time. I don't see them much. There's an ocean of unspoken words between us, but for the first time in my life, there's also a measure of peace. So here's my question to you. What is a legacy? Is it the money and property you leave behind? Or is it the skills, the passion, the trust you place in the ones you love? My brother thought he got the prize, but all he got was a house of cards. I was left with a pile of junk, and it turned out to be the key to my entire future. It was never about the diamonds. It was about what they represented, a secret trust between a father and a son. It wasn't about revenge until it had to be. And sometimes the quietest revenge is simply to live, and live well, free from the chains of the past. Thanks for listening to my story. If you've ever felt overlooked or undervalued by your own family, hit that like button. And I'm curious to hear what you think in the comments below. Did I go too far with my brother, or did he get exactly what he deserved? Let me know. And if you want to hear more stories about the scales of justice finally finding their balance, make sure you subscribe. You never know what secrets are hiding just beneath the surface.